Well, welcome to the AFA Alaska Online Contract Roadshow for our tentative agreement. If ratified, that is date of ratification of August to the 14th, 2024. If you'd like to submit a question, you may do so by clicking the icon with the chat bubble at the bottom of your screen. It has a little question mark within it. And we will do our best to get through as many questions as we can. Some of the questions may be collapsed because they could be similar. And we will also be taking a list of questions that have been unanswered so that we can, at our earliest possible opportunity, answer those as well and post those for your review. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Zoom Master Brian and perhaps Justin as an assist.
First question is, why isn't there extra pay for red eyes? There are 3-day trips, but worth less than a 3-day, and it's stressful on the body.
Excellent question. We would have loved to have some sort of all-nighter red eye pay. We discussed it. It certainly was something that we had kicked around in terms of how to, I shouldn't say just kicked around. We did propose on back of the clock flying. And based on the overall agreement, it was like a 46% all-in agreement. You have to make some decisions about where you're going to put the money. And at this point, we were not able to make it work in terms of our other bargaining priorities. So it wasn't without thought. We definitely would like red eye pay. I think it would be helpful, but we did not achieve it in these negotiations.
In terms of the contract, what did we concede? Looking for a list of concessions and not just reorganized flexibility.
Okay. This came up yesterday too. So how do we want to do this, team? Do we want the same format? I take a stab at it, you fill in the blanks, or does anyone want to chime in on their favorites?
I think maybe I liked how it was done yesterday. Jeff, you want to give some high level what might be perceived, then we can all add our own little tidbits.
Sure, sounds good. Okay, so I will start. It's definitely not an exhaustive list. I will say that first, disclaimer. When we're talking about perceived concessions, sometimes that's in the eye of the beholder, and also that often when we are making a movement in management's direction on a provision, that there's often a trade-off. So we were able to gain something for that provision that was either softened in their direction or given in their direction. So to say that something was truly just a concession, there's really only a couple that are, I would call, true concessions, and the rest are trade-offs. But we also ask that you please look at these in the context of the overall deal, and then I'll look at these in isolation. All right, so in no particular order, the 4Ks, we gave management an additional 5 minutes on the ground. So the current provision allows only 70 minutes on the ground between arrival and departure. It will now go to 75 minutes, so 5 extra minutes. And the quarterly point reduction was, obviously we've talked a lot about that, and both in videos, and I know there's been chatter on the line, that we went from 4 reductions per year to 3. That, however, does have the state sick bank provisions that will help absorb the, I was call it, if you want to call it, a loss of the quarterly point reduction, where you can actually use the state sick bank more strategically, arguably, to make up for that. So that's another one, the QPR. There was the 2 banks, which we've talked about. That is a requirement, we believe, under state law, that there is essentially no ability that we can see a path forward where we retain one bank and it is fully protected and still be in compliance with state law. So there's the 2 banks, which we know is complicated, but we think that is going to be just a necessity of complying with Oregon and Washington paid sick leave. On New Year's Eve, we slid the New Year's Day from midnight to midnight, the holiday pay, back to 2 p.m. on New Year's Eve to 2 p.m. on New Year's Day. So for those of you that were looking for double time pay on New Year's Day between 2 and midnight flying, yes, that could be seen as a concession. But on the flip side of that, those of you that were flying on New Year's Eve between 2 p.m. and midnight, you're now gaining holiday pay for that time period. So to us, it's a wash. Remove the cap on ER. However, all of your ER conversions are now at double time, so that's going to be very expensive for management to affect those. And in our estimation, that means that they will be utilizing ER conversions quite a bit less because it's just going to be too expensive. It actually would be, at the end of the day, to a certain extent, cheaper for them to hire more flight attendants and put them on reserve. Management immersion program, we've seen that as some concerns there. We understand that's a change, so that's definitely a give to management where they wanted to have the ability to shadow flight attendants on the plane. Again, we talked a little bit about this, that there's no scope violation concerns from our end. They cannot perform flight attendant duties, but there's management on the plane potentially doing service duties that they are not able to do currently. And then the PPP, we upped that by 5 TFP on the average per month. The block is going up an additional, it's an additional amount based on the plus 5 TFP per month times the block size. However, the sick leave from your state sick bank will apply towards the PPP. So there is an ability to achieve that easier using sick leave, and also that the PPP went up quite a bit to $4,000.
Yeah. And the boarding pay also counts.
And the boarding pay does count towards PPP. That was my list. I know that there was others who had theirs, so please chime in.
CB and UB no longer counts towards the PPP qualifier, the 40 TFP.
Just to
Positive
clarify
contact.
that, so is that you just said at least 40 TFP of your total value of over the threshold has to be from non-UBCB sources. So if you work UB and CB, that brings you all the way up to your threshold, and then 40 of that just needs to be not from UBCB, whether that's CBTs, boarding pay, flight time, any other source.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification on that.
And James had his hand up. So
Yeah. So you know, when you kind of look at this question, and it's a very valid question. It's at the end of the day, you have to decide if you feel this works for you or not. It's not like there's a I got you or an aha here. So I want to kind of explain how we got to where we are. And when Paula was going over the whole timeline, there was a lot of research that was taken in consideration about like, okay, so what's our strategy going to be? What's our structure going to be? Our biggest thing when we looked at this was what is the biggest pain points that flight attendants are experiencing currently, and how do we address those? And so we very methodically went through every single provision and realized, hey, we see this come up all the time. This bait and switch during reassignments, or we have these IROP situations. People come in, they help the company out. I pick up double time because you need me. I get there, and then you reassign me to a Spokane turn. And it's like, I wouldn't have done that if I knew that was going to happen. So we fixed that. So we basically went through all these revisions and did all that. But I think that membership needs to understand that at the end of the day, this is a vote. This is a contract that is designed for roughly 7,000 people. And there are going to be things in this that either are going to work in your favor or they're not. But as Jeff mentioned, it's the entire thing as a whole. So we had to come up, and this is any type of committee that comes and does this, it has to be a one-size-fits-all model, because we can't negotiate the one thing that's extremely important for you and completely forget about the 6,999 people. We have to do it as a group because we are a group. And so I think this really comes down to, it's like, we held the line. We knew exactly what was super important to flight attendants, such as the duty day and the 4Ks and things like that. And those things were untouchable, despite management. That was on their top 10 list when we started this, and they didn't even get anything but that 5-minute turn time. So 5 additional minutes. So it really does come down to kind of what your interpretation is how I look at it.
And I think there were a couple more things. One is going to be there was a change to pre-cancellation language that mirrors retime language, the retime LOA, which is called minimal schedule changes. And under that very specific language, every single bullet point under that pre-cancellation minimal schedule change has to be met. If one of those things is untrue, then it is a pre-cancel, and the flight attendant still has the opportunity to waive pay or receive pay protection under the current standards. We also made changes to what we consider positive contact to be in block to block. That will be a change, learning curve for some flight attendants. The committee had lots of discussions about this, and in full transparency, when we first started, we were an absolute no. There was just a lot of concerns about how big of a learning curve that might be. And then over the past 2 years that we've been negotiating, it's become very apparent that the other two methods of contact that currently exist are, one, embarrassing, and two, don't work. We were receiving a lot of complaints about they never got calls in the ready room, or people from other work groups would just pick up the phone and hang it up and not even see who's on the other side. We also received complaints that it's really embarrassing to have your name paged over the intercom for all of the airport to hear. And then you have to show up to the gate and all the passengers are looking at you. So because those two positive contact methods weren't effective for flight attendants, we became more open to the idea and concept of block-to-block messaging. In full transparency, it's already in the FAM that flight attendants do have to turn their IMD on and take it off of airplane mode in order to transmit the data from the IMD. So flight attendants are already required to do this. It's just an additional step that you look. The block-to-block message itself is not positive contact. They still need to call you, and if they don't call you, they'll have to send a company representative. So essentially, two forms of contact were removed and replaced by block-to-block. We do believe that a lot of flight attendants already use the crew access change notification as well. They'll just accept the notification, sometimes probably even before they would receive the block-to-block messaging. If you're in flight, they have a scheduling change, you can just log on and accept the alteration to your assignment, or the addition of, maybe if you're an airport or you're a reserve and they want you to do airport standby when you land. And additionally, we also tried our hardest to make sure that the current times when flight attendants are not responsible to be contactable currently in the current language, we outlined every single one of those situations and said that those are times where even if a block-to-block message is sent, flight attendants are not required to respond. And that language is very clear in the block-to-block messaging section.
And then just caveat all this by saying that was our list, but if we missed anything, that was certainly unintentional, but that's what we think is a fairly comprehensive list.
Right. And I just have to chime in a little bit. Initially, when we started negotiations, the company came in with their own list of objectives in these negotiations, and they were very serious about them. They wanted to increase the 480 and the applications, and they wanted to immediately increase the insurance premiums, and they wanted to increase the duty day. And we were like adamant that that was not going to happen. So we had to push back against a lot of the concessions that the company wanted. And also they wanted a lot more flexibility in sections 8 and 10. So, it wasn't like we just marched in and said, oh, this is what we want. And the company was like, okay, sounds good. It was a real battle. And also I have to say, all of the picketing and demonstrating and the participation in actions, wearing the red lanyards, wearing the red pins, really demonstrated support and solidarity and helped us push this across the line. Really, kudos to everybody who helped us increase our leverage at the bargaining table.
Okay, next question. Is there ever a point in negotiating where we as flight attendants could be considered as not negotiating in good faith if we're not willing to negotiate, but just wanting all of our demands to be met with no concessions, for example?
Yeah, I can handle that. Yeah, that's definitely a tack you could take, but I'm just will tell you, if you're in mediation and you are not actively negotiating, just sitting on your demands and your position, the National Mediation Board would probably shelve the negotiations and not schedule any further meetings. And if we were in direct negotiations and we were doing that, the company would absolutely apply for mediation.
Okay, next question. Does the union have a transition protocol agreement established with the company for the probable Hawaiian Airlines merger? Can you share what was established within the TPA? I think it's very pertinent to our TA decision.
Yeah, we're actively engaged in negotiating that with management right now. And I know the pilots have not finalized their TPA either yet. They're still negotiating it.
What was the
But
thought?
I do want to say that the TPA basically just there are a lot of protections in the Alaska contract and also in the Hawaiian contract. And basically the TPA memorializes all that and sets forth a process for conducting negotiations. It's basically just a protocol agreement on how the process is going to take place.
Okay, next question. What was the thought process on the New Year's Eve, New Year's Day holiday changes? Also, did we try adding additional holidays?
We did. We proposed a lot of holidays. Yeah. So we definitely tried to add a lot more holidays. And at the end of the day, again, I feel bad about sounding like a broken record that the overall cost of the deal was 46%. That's with the pay rates, 401k, per diem, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You add all together, 46%. And the additional holidays, we just weren't able to make those work in terms of keeping the cost in a realm that was achievable with the company. So the New Year's Eve idea was to try to make our existing holidays be more efficient. And clearly there's different opinions on the line about whether we achieved that or not. Some feel like that it's a loss. But our thought process was that most people want to be off for free of duty on New Year's Eve or in the morning of New Year's Day because they probably went out the night before. That's not everybody, but we think it's the majority of the flight attendants. So we thought by sliding the full day from midnight to midnight to 2 to 2 would potentially capture more people than the current holiday.
If the TA does pass, how confident are you that we would be able to achieve significant monetary increases into JCBA, including the potential for rigs, et cetera?
So the JCBA in the JCBA negotiations, we would attempt to capture the best of both contracts. And this is the Hawaiian contract right here. It's a very comprehensive, complicated, and advanced document. It's been around for decades and decades, just like yours has. And they have rigs in their contract. Their flying is super productive because anytime you step off the island, you're looking at a lot of block hours. I think we're very confident that we would secure improvements in any JCBA.
I just want to chime in though, the thought process that we have before us now is that ideally we would like 2 bites of the apple, right? We would like to have a TA now, so it would become a contract now for Alaska flight attendants so that we have immediate pay raises and improvements that would help bring us up because our pay rates have slipped so much that we're quite a ways behind Hawaiian in most places, if not all of them these days. So that could be potentially well, it's certainly something we have to deal with in JCPA negotiations. And so we'd like to get immediate improvements now, and then with the JCBA improvements again in very short order. That would be, in our estimation, the most strategic and ideal situation is to do both.
Yeah, the premise of the question was if this TA passes, so I was going with that. But yeah, Jeff is absolutely right. If we go into JCBA negotiations with your current pay rates, we will have to spend a lot of bargaining capital to bring the Alaska pay rates up to and exceeding the Hawaiian pay rates because the pay rates in the TA are higher than the current Alaska or her current Hawaiian pay rates.
And I'd also like to add on, like just from a mathematical perspective, it's a lot less expensive to fill the gap between the 2,000 to 2,500 flight attendants at Hawaiian to bring them up to what would hypothetically be the TA pay rates than it would be to bring 7,000 people up to whatever pay rates we were trying to negotiate with the company for both Hawaiian and Alaska flight attendants. And that, as Paula just said earlier, we would spend a lot of the pot of money just on the rates. Like, that's not even touching any of the work rules or trying to get rigs or doing anything else, just from a mathematical perspective.
Yeah, and I don't know if anyone was on the company meeting today, but they were talking a lot about how, they're going to have to eat some costs, before they get the synergies out of this merger. So they're looking at, maybe some financial stress with the initial interaction with Hawaiian, whatever.
In reference to reimbursement for training at domicile and the various enhancements, what does line miles mean? Can management draw a line across the water where no roads or ferries exist?
I can take that one. So, yeah, this question's come up a couple times, but what a straight line miles is, it's kind of how the crow flies. So, for example, if you were to be able to take a ferry and it was, 5 mile ferry, or you had to go all the way around a peninsula, they would calculate it as that distance of 5 miles from where you're starting to where it is for that line mile. It wouldn't be your drive time. And I know that kind of sounds maybe like a weird way of doing it. I just want to give you some backstory of how this came about. This actually is a ALPA training language that we were able to secure as is and codify. And when another work group that has secured something, it's very easy to kind of say, "Hey, you're doing with them. We got to do the same thing." And so it's the same application, and so it's basically 50 straight line miles, point A to point B. So an example would be if you lived in Bakersfield, but your training was Long Beach. That's over 50 straight line miles, so you would qualify for a hotel. The TA in that section does specify, the night prior. It also specifies if your travel time and the training time are a certain amount of hours, you get one on the day after, or the end of your training. So there's a whole very clear specifics on what qualifies and how you actually go about doing it.
Next question. Can you please explain why exactly the proposal of having previous Horizon flight attendants retain seniority when it comes to vacation accrual and pay was not accomplished?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So that was not without trying. We tried several different permutations of honoring Horizon service. Ultimately, the company was unwilling to entertain any version of it because they are concerned about single carrier status. What that means is that, say, another wholly owned subsidiary such as Horizon, because we share so many services and routes where they're coordinated routes, we also have the same uniforms. A lot of the same support staff is shared services. So there's certain criteria that the National Mediation Board uses to look at whether two different groups represent, or two different carriers represent the same transportation system for that group. And if you tick off enough of the boxes, it is possible that they would consider it to be one carrier. So the concern from the Alaska management side is that if we add anything more that will make it appear that we're even closer together to Horizon, that there will be a potential single carrier status filing, especially from the Horizon side, that could potentially go to the NMB and be approved, which would then mean that we would merge together the two groups. And like just what we're doing with Hawaiian, we would have to negotiate a JCBA, figure out how to merge together two very different fleets, one being regional, one being mainline. So that is the concern. Basically, they're like, there's absolutely no way we can do this because of single carrier concerns.
Yeah. So even aside from the cost, which was substantial, the company was just adamant, like hard no, never, never, never.
Is there any provision in this contract that monetarily holds management accountable when they do not adhere to the contract, and a timeline for implementation? For example, back to book, it took years to implement the reserve self-assignment as well.
All right. There's a few questions in there. So the one about whether there's any contractual provisions to hold management accountable, yes, when there's an identifiable loss of pay, and that's true today. If there's any provision that is broken, not adhered to, where there's an identifiable loss of pay, we bring that forward through either just sometimes it's as simple as having a conversation, but if we need to, we put those issues on the scheduling review board, or we put it before the alternate dispute resolution process, and those go through that process in order to get resolved. And the flight attendants, in almost all cases, end up getting paid if we can identify an actual loss. If we need to, then we would take it to arbitration, and quite often those cases are found to be in our favor, or they're settled because we have a good case. If we're talking about other such as crew access issues or PBS, I think that's probably where this question was going. No, we were unable to secure those, not without lack of trying. We certainly proposed some heavy penalties. They ended up getting so watered down by the time we were to a place where we might have been able to get something, that we thought it was more of a slap in the face to flight attendants to have only a couple times per year at a TFP per person. So we're talking 2 TFP total for the whole year. It was actually probably more likely that we could continue to advocate through our normal processes, which is letter writing campaigns, writing into management, the advocacy that we normally do through from the officers and from our committee chairs and such, that we would be better off sticking with what we have than conceding to 2 TFP a year. So that's where we ended. And then on implementation, we're still in conversations with management about implementation, and we have gotten commitments in most cases with the pay to have that at least be retroed if it can't be done right away. But there are no specific implementation penalties if they do not meet time frames other than the commitment to do retro. So I would say yes, but that is still to be determined, or it's still in process.
In regards to positive contact with crew scheduling, will our personal phones now be a positive way for scheduling to contact us?
That has always been the case. That's why flight attendants can have two numbers on file. Your personal phone is considered a method of positive contact, even in current language.
In Section 8, if at domicile rest is reduced to between 10.5 and 10 hours, the flight attendant will be paid 2 times their rate of the trip flown if unaltered. Please clarify unaltered.
Unaltered means that you accept and fly the assignment that is on your line of time when you're given it. So if you accept the assignment and then subsequently SIP it or trade it with open time, that is altered, so you will not be eligible for the pay.
If this TA gets voted down, is the negotiating committee going to change, or are they going to continue on?
That's a good question. So let me start with more of a general disclaimer, because there are some things that, whether the negotiating committee members individually have an opinion about whether they would continue or not, there's also the ability that the negotiating committee, including like me as the chair and as the MEC president, that we serve at the pleasure of the MEC. That means that we directly report to the LEC presidents, who you have all elected to represent you. So the MEC could choose to change the committee. That's certainly within their scope of authority, or part of the committee, or say the chair. Say, for instance, like myself. So they could do all those things whether we wanted to continue or not. So that's somewhat up to, well, it is up to the MEC to make that decision. Outside of that, then I would be happy to start with me, and we can go through everyone if they'd like to chime in. So this is a little bit of a complicated question for me, because we also have the merger coming up. I would say if the merger is not approved, or if it's not approved in a timely manner, I have every intent to see this process through to the completion of my term, My term completes in December of 2025, so there's 1 year, a little bit less than a year and a half left in my term, and I plan to finish out that term unless it's ended early. Now, that is possible that if we have the merger approved in the short term, which could happen as early as August, early August the 5th, is when the Department of Justice owes a response back. If the answer is yes, merger is approved, we have to merge together the MECs within 90 days of that date. So that means there's an election of the president, vice president, secretary, treasurer. Our MEC would go from 6 LECs to 8. Gotta hold up the right fingers, including their 2 over at Horizon or at Hawaiian. So if that happens, then there will be a new MEC election. And at this point, I've made no firm commitments about whether I would finish out this current term in that process. But if my term or the current term goes on unaltered, then I plan to finish it out, no matter what.
And I'm 100% going to see it all the way through to the very end.
I think that was something that I said in my interview process, is that I was very aware that there's a possibility that it wouldn't be just one TA, that it could possibly be 2 TAs, and that I was here and committed for the whole journey.
I have to agree. This is a commitment I signed up for, and if the powers that be feel that they have the right people in place, that's beyond my call. But if I have the directive to continue or the authority to continue, I want to see it through, because this is so important for flight attendants, and we put so much time into it, and it would be a disservice to not to get to the end. So.
Yeah, and obviously I would remain if I was not replaced.
And then I just want to clarify also, in case anyone's said that Jeff said he's going to quit. I'm definitely not saying that. I just want to clarify that what I am saying is that when we merge together the MECs, that the new MEC president, to finish out the current term, so when the MECs merge, the surviving carrier's term is what stays in place. So the term would end still December of 2025. But you are still at that point responsible for overseeing the dual operation of both AFA Alaska and AFA Hawaiian. In addition, that if this TA is turned down, we have our current negotiations for AFA Alaska going on. Hawaiian has early openers coming up very, very soon. So we potentially could be talking about 2 different contract negotiations open at the same time. Meanwhile, while the company would likely want to start pivoting to joint contract negotiations. So it's a big thing to take on. That is a conversation that really, at this point, that I need to have, not just me, but I would have with the MEC, and that the MEC, looking at all of both at Hawaiian and Alaska, it's the combined MEC that would be making that decision. So I'm just saying that there's a lot more to it than just saying yes. However, I'd like to see the process through until you have a ratified contract.
Okay, next question. If I retire prior to date of ratification, will I still receive the 2 years of retro pay?
No, sorry. You need to stay, you need to be active as an Alaska Airlines flight attendant. So that means employed as an Alaska Airlines flight attendant on date of ratification, which is August the 14th.
Right. And if you can hang on and you have a sick leave balance, you'll get it paid out. So it's worth it to hang around if the contract is ratified.
All right, next question. If line holders pick up a single reserve day, is it still converted to ER? Does it qualify for the 2 times pay?
I'll take that one. In current language under 11H, it says that if a reserve creates a block between an AM and PM, that it will become ER. And it says the same thing for line holders. If they pick up a single reserve day, it will become ER. The language doesn't say converted. However, it does specifically say that crew scheduling can convert a reserve to ER. So it's very specific to crew scheduling is actioning the ER, and that a flight attendant isn't knowingly or voluntarily creating an ER due to scheduling modification. So hopefully that's pretty clear.
Okay, next question. For the 6th week of vacation, is that for 25 years of company service or is it occupational service or seniority?
Yeah, I can answer that one. It's the same as all the other vacations. It's sorry, not occupational. Before I get everyone spun up, it's company service. Yeah, company service at Alaska Airlines counts towards vacation.
Can you please expand on use of vacation payout while on leave? What does that mean or entail?
Sure. Yeah, I can tackle that one. So when you're on leave, you may, under the provisions of 15M or N, that you are able to coordinate or go actually uncoordinated. So you could actually be on an unpaid leave. There's options for that. But if you would like to maintain your health care and also supplement your income while on leave, then you're able to coordinate either using sick leave or vacation. So the vacation you're able to coordinate a minimum of 1 day or 2 days per month.
All right, next question. In regard to the point reduction form, are we only allowed to use it once every 4 months, or do we have the option of using it 3 times a year, not restricted to a trimester?
It is restricted to each trimester. So it'll become, right now we have 3-month blocks essentially, but it'll move to 4-month blocks, which would be January, February, March, April, and then May, June, July, August, and then September, October, November, December.
Okay, will more virtual roadshows be added to accommodate for the delayed release of the full text of the TA?
Yeah, so we've talked about that. Yes, we will. We're looking at the dates and our availability right now. Our intent it's at this point is we think that most of the questions have been answered in terms of just the body of the roadshow. That these are recorded. We will produce the best of version of the formal presentation. We think that flight attendants are more interested in the Q&A, it seems like. So what we're kicking around is potentially doing a Q&A only session or sessions depending on where we are. And we're thinking at this point to probably do it slightly after the Department of Justice has made their decision. So after August the 5th, that's the date that the Department of Justice has to provide some sort of guidance or decision regarding whether or not the merger is approved then. So we're thinking shortly after that date, and we will get back to you as soon as possible because we know flight attendants want to be able to plan to participate in those Q&A sessions.
Right, and the polls don't close until after that date.
In regard to sick leave, how many TFP will go into the state bank if one has less than 40 TFP in their sick bank upon implementation?
All of their TFP, if they have fewer than 40 TFP in their sick leave bank today, and well, I mean, at the implementation of the state sick leave bank, which under the contract, right, or under the tentative agreement right now is January 1st of 2025, then the entire balance will go into the state sick bank.
All right, and to kind
Before we
of
move on to the next one, I just want to back up to the question before about coordinating vacation. This is a good example of even if you look at this stuff all the time, it's always good to look at the language before you answer definitively. I think I said as I was walking through this that you can coordinate 1 or 2 vacation days. It's actually minimum is 2 vacation days. So I just want to make sure to correct the record on that so I'm not confusing anybody. It's 2 vacation days minimum per month.
Let's see. So to go back to sick leave, another associated question with a more specific application. So for those with smaller sick banks, are you able to combine bank usage for a single trip or a single day? For example, you only have 4.5 TFP in your state and 0.5 TFP in your CBA bank, and you call out for a 5 TFP turn. Are you able to get paid for the entire turn? And do points accrue even though most of the time comes from the state bank?
And this is a really specific question. I actually think we need to look at the language real quick for that because in general, no. I'm going to use more of a general example that you can't pull from both of them at the same time, like a partial, for each day. You have to have enough in each bank, well, the bank on a day-for-day basis. However, there is a provision where we transition from one to the other, and I'm thinking it's when
Yeah.
you have less than the amount. So let's just double
Yeah,
check.
that's what it is. If you
is.
start out in one bank and you don't have sufficient TFP to cover the whole trip, it will switch to the other bank.
Yeah, it's actually it's clearly written out. It's the reference if you want to write this down. And by the way, this section is in the TA 2 that's posted. It's section 16 B5. So 16 Bravo 5. The title of this says a flight attendant may use more than one sick leave bank per sequence only if the designated bank is insufficient to cover the entire sequence. It actually specifies state and CBA bank and how those applications work out. And there's four points to it that you can just follow through.
Yeah, and I do want to say that points would accrue if the CBA bank was involved.
All right. If during a verification period, a family member passes away and I use my state bank to cover some of that absence, is the company going to require me to provide a copy of their death certificate during the mourning period while I'm planning their funeral?
So I think that this is a kind of layered question because in that specific situation, the flight attendant should be actually accessing a different part of our contract language that wouldn't require any sort of verification, which is bereavement leave. So in that specific situation, you should utilize the bereavement leave that is nothing to do with the state bank. So even if there is a verification period, there will be no call to you because you're accessing a CBA portion of the contract that is specific to bereavement. So please use your bereavement leave in those situations.
Yes, and additionally, you have under verification, you have at least 10 days to provide the information. You don't have to do it immediately. And also, the state bank can be used for relatives who aren't covered under the bereavement leave section. So it does provide the flexibility in case it's not a covered relative or friend who has passed away.
All right, next question. It's a combination of a few questions. So there's still some unclear understanding of the 3 allowable verification periods. How long are those for? When do they happen? And does the company choose the timing of those at their own discretion? And do they change each year?
Yeah, they can change each year. I'm just going to handle them as I remember the questions. The verification periods can be up to a 10-day period, and the company has to provide at least 2 days notice prior to the verification period. If your illness started, you called in sick prior to the company's announcement of the verification period, then you do not have the verification requirement. You're considered outside that verification period. And then you have 10 days to supply your verification information to management. Under the law, the company has unlimited verification provisions. They can always require verification. We negotiated it down to 3 per year.
With the new insurance benefits, can we apply for the adoption reimbursement for a recent adoption that occurred before ratification of the new agreement if it passes?
That is unclear, and that's something we would have to check with, and management would have to agree to that because normally these provisions would not go into effect until ratification. But that's absolutely something we could go check on.
Next question. Why were we unable to secure a 401k contribution regardless of participation, similar to what the pilots and the mechanics currently have?
Mechanics.
Okay, so you're talking like without the match, so like where it's just a contribution. I think that's the question.
I think it's referring to a direct contribution.
Yeah. So some some there are some carriers that are flight attendant groups that have a direct contribution, no match required component. That's often stepped in with, like, say, a match component. And Paula can please chime in if.
Yeah, Hawaiian has it.
Okay, there you go. See, so that is,
JCPA.
it isn't uncommon in the industry to have some amount of that, but I will say that
Actually, I'm going to step all over you. It is
go ahead.
uncommon to have that. There are a few carriers that do have it, but it is not the norm. And I do want to say your pilots traded an incredibly expensive, actually an untenable defined benefit pension plan that they had, and that was becoming underfunded, and the company would have had to kick in like an unbelievable amount of money into it. And so instead, several negotiations ago, they negotiated the current 401k provision, plus I think some retiree medical provisions with the pilots in order to get out from underneath that defined benefit plan. That's why theirs is so rich. They had like this massive giant thing that was a financial liability for the company that they were able to trade for that. And that actually was considered a concession by the pilots.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, there is no flight attendant group out there that's even close to, it just would say our pilots as a comparator of a 16% no match required plan. There's no flight attendant groups that are even close to that. There is a few, like, so Southwest has a higher than ours, but it's a match.
Yeah, Southwest is 9.3. And then you guys are the next highest.
And I do want to clarify, it's not that we didn't ask for it. I think a majority of the things that that was something we asked for. We try to play with the numbers, and at the end of the day, I think that everything has a number, everything has a charge line to it, and I think that a majority of people would be shocked that the direct contribution is quite a lot of money, especially taking into account the percentage of flight attendants who aren't currently contributing to a 401k. So we would have had to eat that cost since they aren't even contributing themselves right now. So we couldn't even offset that number during negotiations. So we did look at that. We did try. We do try for most of these things. When it's like, why don't we have this? We tried. We really, truly did.
Okay, next question. Is there any change to being able to swap, drop, or trade with open time? Was this discussed during negotiations?
No change other than we added the ability or support more TSN, so the ability to drop. There's a slightly increased ability to drop on day one based on improved TSN, but no changes to other trade rules. And yes, it was talked about quite a bit. There was a lot of conversations about open time, and we were unable to achieve differences in open time.
And I also think that these types of conversation deserve transparency for the membership. So when we first started out, open time was probably number 2 on our list, back to book. Still a paw in a lot of people, or a thorn in a lot of people's paw, as someone eloquently wrote online. So that was one of our highest priorities. Once the merger was announced, we had to reconsider our bargaining priorities, because it became a quick realization that the abilities of the company's ability to actually execute change and provide new open time trade rules before the JCBA going through, whenever that happened, whether that was us going through multiple TA votes and then the GCBA, or a ratification and then JCBA, we had zero confidence. I'll say I personally had zero confidence that the company could execute any significant open time changes before the JCBA concluded. And so because of that, I just did not feel personally comfortable marketing open time changes that would not be possible, that flight attendants would not actualize, that people might vote yes on, when that is not something the company could do. And there are a lot of layers to this, but even if the company was like, we're fine, we can spend $94 million on this open time change that you would like, the actual people who provide the system, Jeppesen, would not be able to execute. So it wasn't even, it was less of a yes, no situation and more of a, this is actually not possible or tenable within the scope of the JCBA coming right behind us. And so that is the truth. And I think that everyone on the committee kept everybody honest about, the reality of that.
Yep. Before we get to the next question, I have a correction on my answer about the contribution to the 401k. Jeff, you were right, of course. There are American, Delta, Hawaiian, and United all have some type of contribution, but Hawaiian's is the highest at 5%, the company direct contribution.
Okay, next question. Will we have to submit a claim or comments into Rainmaker for the transportation or hotel wait time pay to apply, or would that be done automatically after speaking with crew scheduling?
So if you actually go into section 34, it clearly defines what you have to do in terms of notifying crew scheduling whenever you have whenever your delay starts, and then notifying crew scheduling whenever you've actually received your key, for example. So and you can email them too. It clears out. It's actually going to be handled through SRB, or you're going to go to the AFA website. And once again, this is clearly laid out about the whole reporting process. You're actually going to file a ticket on the AFA support site, and then the scheduling review board is going to get together, and they're going to pull the documents that have the proof that this is when you contact and whatnot. They're going to piece it together. They're going to present it, and they're going to apply through compensation that way.
Okay, next question. Why weren't we able to secure a better commuter policy, for example, covering full flights? Many other airlines have commuter policies which cover this. We have commuters with the D8Y listing in the dozens in some cities, yet we don't have protection to get to work.
Yeah, so I will tell you, the committee can back me up on this. I was just so adamant that loads had to be included into the commuter policy. Everywhere I go in the industry, loads are a component of the commuter policy. That is the main reason people can't get on flights or can't get to work on flights. And the management's negotiating committee was, very much against it. But I will just be honest with you, it goes farther up the food chain than that. Your top management is absolutely opposed to having loads in the contract. We argued till we were blue in the face, and it was one of the last things that we removed from the table was our demand that loads be part of the commuter policy. They just think it's a get out of jail free card. And we're just absolutely, it was a hard no, and they were never going to give us loads. And I just don't understand it, because flight attendants, if they're not going to make the flight, they have other avenues to, cover the trip. So it's just, it cuts against them, because they would have notification that you weren't going to make the flight, and they would also be able to have utilization out of a flight attendant who wasn't going to be able to successfully commute. But they just were adamant they weren't going to do that. And also, I know you guys have the D8s. You're the only company that has a higher boarding priority for commuters. So you do have that. And I understand that, though, that loads are a huge component that is missing for the commuter policy.
And again, like full transparency, the company was willing to give us loads in exchange for D8Y. And at the end of the day, that was not going to work. We were not going to, that would absolutely be a concession to have every other work group still have D8Y and not us, in order to attain commuter load protection. So I think that sometimes, like, knowing those types of things is kind of helpful for membership, that these are the things that we were working against. Everything is possible. Is getting load protection possible? Absolutely. Just not in a way that the committee was willing to sacrifice.
Okay, next question. I'm going to combine a few questions about the hotel gain sharing. for hotel gain sharing, if this TA passes, it sounds like the details are still not worked out about what that letter of agreement might look like. So will that go into effect at date of ratification? When will we possibly know the details surrounding it? And there's a specific question about if a flight attendant is scheduled to deadhead home after a run and they request to be released early and don't need the hotel, would that situation apply for hotel gain sharing possibly?
I can tackle some of this, and if someone wants to jump in and comment on it. So if the commitment to negotiate hotel gain share program is actually an LOA that's in the back of this contract. So the actual gain share program, which would be a completely new thing here at Alaska, we don't have this. What this is, it's a commitment to negotiate one of those programs after ratification of this, and there's a specific time frame in that where the company has to come together with AFA to do that. So in terms of what would you qualify, what doesn't qualify, how does it work, those details aren't worked out because those do be determined. But how hotel gain share programs typically work, basically you forego your hotel room and you receive compensation or some type of cost share for that room. So let's say you are a San Diego based flight attendant, you're a San Diego based flight attendant, but you live in San Francisco. And so you bid San Francisco overnights and you just go home. Or let's say you fly to Maui or you fly to Boston, you have family there, and you always pick up, Boston trips because you go see your family or friends when you get there. The whole point of this is you can actually forego your hotel room. The company saves money. You receive some type of compensation for doing that. It's like you share in the cost. What that dollar value is still needs to be worked out. United, I believe, is $20 for theirs. I had a program at a similar airline that I worked with, and it was $55. But there's also a bunch of restrictions on, for example, if you forego your hotel room, then you can't trade your trip anymore because they've now released that hotel out of inventory. And so there's restrictions on that. So all of those details need to be worked out. But it's kind of a complicated process. And when we started this, we wanted to get the TA stuff done, the stuff that really affected with, the pay rates and the scheduling stuff and things like that. And now we can focus on getting this done if this ratifies, where we can focus on getting all the criteria of that talked about. Does anyone want to add anything to?
No, I think you did a good job covering it.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate, I've kind of seen some chatter that it's a loose end and whatever, but it's a legally binding document that the company has to do this. Like we have to come together and discuss. And if it's feasible, then we have to implement it. And so it's not like it's one of these things where it's like we don't have time to do it, we're not going to do it. It's actually it is one commitment that has to happen if this ratifies.
Well, it also benefits the company too, so they have a vested interest in having it happen.
So we'll get the answer about your deadhead if when this eventually
the thing about deadhead is it depends on how close in you release it. If the company has already paid for the block and the cancellation provision is such that they couldn't get paid back for it if they release the room, then you wouldn't be paid for it. And that's how those provisions are structured.
Yeah. And then not to get too into the weeds, but when you have so many hotel rooms per night, there's like tax incentive savings. It's just the way that these hotel deals are structured. And if you go below that cap, then the company actually pays a lot more in like just occupancy tax. So they have to work out all the economics of everything to kind of figure out where that sweet spot is, what can they do, what can't they do, and what the compensation will be.
Okay, next question. If we go back to the table, can we lose any of these achievements?
All right. Well, could we? That's a very speculative question. And the answer is yes, we could, but there's no way to say. So I don't want to say yes, we will. I just say yes, we could lose some of the achievements. I think there's a strong sentiment out there that you always vote no on the first contract. We definitely don't subscribe to that viewpoint. That history bears that it can be a mixed experience. Just at AFA Alaska, if you look at the last contract, 2013 to 2014, TA1 was rejected, and TA2 arguably did actually improve pretty much everything. There was not anything I can think of off the top of my head where it was a trade downward. But the previous time that we rejected TA back in the 2005-2006 range, TA1 had a limited amount of flying scheduled at 12.5-hour duty day, and it was 25% or up to 25%, and a 360 TFP minimum flying. That was rejected. The 12.5 hours was dropped, so our 10.5-hour duty day was retained in TA2. But the 360 went to 480, and that's just a very simplistic. That there's more to it than that, but that's a very simplistic look at. In that case, there was some trades that were made. Arguably, if you were really focused on the duty day, it was a gain going from TA1 to TA2 to keep it at the 10.5. But if you wanted a lesser flying minimum, it was a loss. It went from 360 to 480. So it is entirely possible that that could happen here, but there's no guarantees.
Yeah, I mean, management could take the position, oh, you want more money in the rate, so you have to increase the duty days so we have, more productivity. I mean, who knows what would happen? It's always a gamble.
Okay, next question. With the addition of bereavement for miscarriages only in the second and third trimester of pregnancy, does this mean a woman will have to prove to the company at what point in her pregnancy she miscarried to take the bereavement leave?
That's a good question. We haven't had that one yet. So I will just be honest that we haven't had that specific conversation down to that level of detail about what would constitute validation of the need for bereavement. I will say that in general, that management does not ask for proof of bereavement. So that's hard for me to answer that because technically we agreed to it was only the second and third trimester, but management does not ask for such validation for any passage from your family. And I don't think that they intend to start doing so. Doesn't stop them from doing that though. And I certainly don't want to make that commitment here. So I will have to say, I do not know at this time. We can certainly ask that question and clarify. But it won't be now. We'll have to do that follow up in the Q&A postings.
In regards to the passes and jump seats, does the current seniority order for the jump seat still apply? If a supervisor and a current flight attendant show up for the jump seat 30 minutes prior, who would be awarded it?
So I was making making my note about to do. What was the question about jump seat and if a supervisor showed up?
Supervisor.
Yeah, it's in regards to the jump seat and passes section and the occupancy of the jump seat. So if a supervisor and a current flight attendant show up for the jump seat 30 minutes prior, who is awarded it?
So technically, if you're saying a supervisor who holds an FAA certificate, they have to hold an FAA certificate in order to sit on the jump seat. So they have to be an in-flight supervisor. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's by company seniority. So it's whatever year of hire they have with the company.
Under 30, but over 30,
Yeah.
the flight attendant has priority over the jump seat.
Right.
Okay, next question. Will the additional flying for reserves count as a reassignment? For example, it's the reserves last day with one flight back to base and they get tagged for a turn.
No, even now, reserves don't get paid reassignment pay. Reserves are just on reserve. So at any time, your schedule could fluctuate, provided that crew scheduling brings you back before the end of your block.
Okay, next question. It looks like if this TA passes, flight attendants between 16 and 20 years will lose their longevity pay, and flight attendants from 13 to 20 years will receive no extra longevity pay. Is that correct?
Yeah, I can answer that one. I wouldn't say necessarily that yes, okay, lose their longevity pay, but what we really did is fold the longevity rate of the dollar into the pay rate. And so rather than having longevity pay separately, where you don't get that on sick leave and vacation, we went ahead and incorporated the longevity premium into your rate so that you're getting paid the increased rate on all activity, including sick leave and vacation. So it's not necessarily a loss, it's actually a gain in the sense that you get paid on everything. And then the longevity premium of 150 gets picked up at year 20, like it does today.
Okay, next question. Can you please explain why boarding pay is not included in the vacation 480 threshold?
Sure. So boarding pay will be included in the vacation 480 threshold for the purposes of accruing for achieving your health care. So it does for that one. However, the other ones is they didn't want to change, they didn't want to improve the 480 any more than the items that we got, which was boarding pay towards healthcare and the quarter of vacation towards vacation. And that was as far as they were willing to move, which is why it's excluded in other applications.
Okay, next question. Can you clarify pre-cancellations? Do we still have the option to not accept an assignment and waive pay?
I can take that one. So yes, pre-cancellation for the most part has remained the same with the exception of minimal schedule changes. So flight attendants still have every opportunity to access the current language in pre-cancellations if you have a pre-cancellation. So if you would like to wait and call between 6 and 8 p.m. and see what they have and choose to waive pay or use pay protection or receive pay protection over the phone, flight attendants still have access to that. Crew scheduling now can additionally just push the pay protection to your line. So let's say something cancels 2 weeks from now, crew scheduling is sufficiently staffed, they're not worried about it, they push the pay protection, you're pay protected and release. Alternatively, flight attendants can also have a standing waive pay preference form. So it would just be in your file. And if there's a pre-cancellation on your line, crew scheduling can go in and look to see if you would like to just waive pay and opt out and take your day or days off. And they can push that notification to your line saying you've waived pay for this flight. You are now able to either pick up other pairings or you can enjoy your days off. And then lastly, we incorporated minimal schedule changes, and every single bullet in the minimal scheduling change has to be true. Even if one part of it is not true, then that is considered a pre-cancel, and the flight attendant is then afforded the current provisions in the contract to either waive pay or utilize pay protection if that's available between 6 and 8.
Okay, for the next question, in regards to sick leave payout at retirement, is sick leave paid at 100% from both the state and CBA banks when you retire if you have 1,000 TFP total combined in both banks, or does it need to be separate?
It's the combined. Combined for purposes of determining what your payout threshold is.
Okay. Next question, could you please provide clarification about section 26F2 regarding dues checkoff? What does that mean?
So 26F2, was this the double deduction or specifically dues checkoff? Double deduction? Okay.
Let me check.
Yeah, I think it's double deduction, but we should just validate that. I'll stall while we're doing this. I believe we're talking about double deductions where it's just if you are in arrears, it is. Okay, if you're in arrears with your dues, then instead of actually being truly in arrears where you owe money and then you could potentially go into bad standing if you didn't make yourself whole with the AFA, then there's now this ability to do a double deduction where you'll continue to be deducted at twice, basically your dues 2 times. So instead of the current 50 per month, it would be 100 per month until you're caught up. And that would keep you in member in good standing status so that you would be able to participate in elections, voting on TAs, etc.
All right, next question. When will we get the completed TA in writing? And will voting be extended due to the delay of getting the completed text TA?
Yeah, we got this asked this question, I think, yesterday too, at least in terms of when we were going to get it in writing. I would love to tell you exactly when. I can tell you that we are constantly working on this outside of when we are talking with all of you. And is lots of effort being done to get this out ASAP. We know that everyone wants to see the other 5 sections. I just don't want to make a firm commitment that we would potentially miss, other than we have made the commitment that that will be out prior to the voting opening. And no, we are not planning to delay votes, the polling, because the TA has come out later. There is a lot of time. It opens on next week, the 24th, and it closes like 3 weeks later. There's ample time to vote, even with the TA coming out a little bit later than we had hoped. On top of that, we've heard from a lot of flight attendants that they're waiting until the August 5th date from the Department of Justice, and that's perfectly fine. We're absolutely okay with that. Just want to point out though, please do not wait until the last minute to vote. Like, don't wait till August the 14th in the morning. Please vote with some cushion prior to that, because inevitably some people have problems voting for various reasons, and we want to make sure everyone who would like to participate in voting votes. And in fact, everyone needs to vote. So it's kind of a long way of saying no, we're going to keep the polling at the current on the current schedule unless something unforeseen comes up between now and the end.
Okay, next question. Does boarding pay TFP count towards sick leave accrual?
It does. Yes.
Okay. Next question. Can you provide some more information about the increase to per diem at 25 cents? How was that increase achieved or determined?
Well, we asked for more. I think that was in some of our proposals that were published. So we definitely asked for more, and a lot of discussion about the overall cost of what the per diem would be, what the company was willing to cost of the overall deal was. And we settled with this amount, which was stepping into the per diem increases over the life of the agreement. That's the short version. Team, chime in if you have any other perspective or thoughts on it.
I guess one thing I would add, we have had some crafty people write in the past and say, why can't we forego pay raises and just have per diem at $4 or $5, so that way we can like have this tax-free income instead? And unfortunately, the system is actually not designed for that. And there's actually a IRS like cap about how much non-taxable per diem you can get, and if it's above what the actual federal allowances for that particular city, you actually get taxed on that money. And so there is also a fine balance by kind of finding that sweet spot where you're actually compensating for your time away, but it doesn't turn into a taxable income. So there's also that factor involved. It's not as kind of straightforward as it is. And to Jeff's point, it's like, again, it's how you allocate your money, because your TFP rate, the money that goes into your actual pay rate touches everything that you do. But if you were to divert money into just per diem, well, it's only affected on per diem. And so you also have to look at the kind of the cost benefit of how you allocate funds, because and it's more beneficial by allocating in specific ways than it is necessarily in the other. So it's a whole calculation and thought process. And like I said, there's a lot of factors involved in that.
Right, and you don't get the 401k match on per diem. So having the money in the pay rates is an accelerator for other add-on pays.
I feel like I need to mention that even with today's per diem rates before they're increased, you're actually getting taxed in certain localities, especially in the less expensive CONUS locations, where probably the Midwest is a good example. Your per diem is very likely exceeding what the federal taxable limit is, and so you're receiving a small amount of taxable income on that per diem today.
Okay, next question. Are you able to provide a list of what the company's top items were for things that they wanted to change?
Unscripted
Oh,
memo. We haven't been asked that question, but
no, but one
duty
thing they
day,
wanted
a little
to
bit.
do was bring the contract into compliance with the laws because they were tired of getting sued.
I would say they toyed with the duty day mostly via 4K. I know at one point they had one throwaway proposal that increased the duty day. They didn't really go after the duty day in that way, but for sure they wanted it was 5K, right? That's what they started out with. 5K
Yeah.
or at least 4.4K. And we
I was
still
gonna say, yeah, then it slowly kept dropping 4.5, 4.4, 4.2. Yeah, I think they were like, but we could do 4.2. And I said, but you can't. Well, we all said, but you can't.
and then
And
the attendance policy with we know that flight attendants have had a lot of conversations about the quarterly point reduction, but they wanted to change point values, change the roll off to 24 months. What else? There was a lot of stuff in there where they really wanted to make the attendance policy much less favorable than it is today.
And they also wanted to open up the JA possibility, and we shut them down right away on that.
they had a lot of grandiose ideas. Coterms was
So
a weird
term, yeah.
fight that we had for a while that burned probably 3 months that we didn't need to. They would not get off of coterms for a little bit. When we were doing PSL, which is the sick leave portion, for a minute when we were arguing back and forth, they kind of threw their hands up in the air. Instead of our PPP, they said they would exchange that for flight attendants could, receive whatever premium, whether that was 1.25, 1.5, whatever they thought would be a good premium for working over your monthly line in exchange for monthly flying minimums. So they tried to get very creative and achieve some of their goals that they had going into negotiations. And I think the committee did a pretty good job of holding the line on some major productivity issues that the company is facing.
Yeah, your pilots have monthly minimum flying requirements, as do several flight attendant contracts. And they were like thinking that would be a really great thing to have at Alaska. And we disabused them of that immediately.
All right, next question. Were rigs addressed during negotiations?
Oh my gosh, yes. We spent a lot of time talking about rigs, the costs, their potential impact on pairings. We did a lot of pairing runs and pairing analysis. We proposed the Southwest rigs essentially, as well as ground pay, whether we went back and forth between calling it a rig or whether it was just going to be pay only, but ground time, which was going to basically be a more improved version than boarding pay and a blocker better in TFP. So there was a lot of conversations about it. And at the end of the day, rigs are potentially very, very expensive depending on how you configure them, which again, this is a part of the overall deal. You have to figure out how to we're going to get your best outcome for all the flight attendants or the majority of the flight attendants. And rigs don't touch everybody. So a lot of the rigs for, let's just say, for more senior flight attendants that can bid for and hold more efficient trips, rigs don't necessarily do a lot for you. And I think that flight attendants, when they're talking about rigs, they're thinking more about the duty time. And that's what they're really more after, is that they want to be paid for all time while on duty. But that being said, when we ran the rig analysis, there was at least the last few that indicated that hotel nights were going up, but the hotel costs were going down, which told us that the hotel quality was lesser, which means that basically that the quality was going to be less. And so we did not think that achieving the rigs, which were very expensive, not touching everybody, could actually negatively impact our pairings. it was better to go with boarding pay ultimately, although we stepped through a bunch of other options to get there. And team, please chime in because that was a very short explanation for what is months of conversations and agonization.
Yeah, and oh, go ahead, Kiki.
Okay. Also, I want to speak to the duty hour rig, because again, we did a lot of homework with that. When we initially put that rig into the optimizer, when our base was show us what it costs to run with the Southwest rigs. And I think what people forget is that the Southwest network, like how their operations is significantly different than ours. When we utilize the DHR, the duty hour rig, it almost never triggered. The optimizer just optimized away from duty hour rig. It didn't trigger. So we were paying for a rig that wouldn't trigger, which then caused us to have, or what we could conceive would end up being less desirable layovers and less desirable places for shorter amounts of time. And so to pay for rigs that wouldn't trigger, and then to also have this ramification that I think would be unintended, which is the optimizer is just going to optimize away from whatever rigs that we're asking for, was not something that was worthwhile in the end.
And in the end, boarding pay touches every flight attendant who's working on an aircraft every day. So we thought that was the most efficient use of, if we're going to spend, we're having to be charged whatever the cost of that is, where it will touch everybody. And it does significantly bump up the effective pay rates.
Okay, next question. Was there any progress made during negotiations for cost coverage for IVF?
Yeah, we did talk about it for sure. Paul, go ahead. I think you were gonna.
Yeah, I was gonna say, as Jeff said, we did discuss it, but we were not able to secure it.
Okay. Does this TA or any of the associated provisions have an early out incentive?
Not exactly, but Kiki, you're gonna chime in with the but. Here's your plan.
Yeah.
Please.
So no, but yes. So previously, senior flight attendants who perhaps maxed out with their sick leave, were only paid out at the 25% rate before. So those flight attendants, if they're over 150.9, I believe, whatever the last number is, they'll be paid out their sick leave at 100% of the rate. And I did quick math the other day, and if you are just above the threshold, I believe it's over $62,000. And if you are maxed out on sick leave, it's over $118,000. And all you have to do to qualify for that is make it past date of ratification, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
And then you can cash out your sick leave. And I think as a lot of people who are looking into the crystal ball and planning their retirement, flight attendants also are very aware that if they make it all the way through the end of the year, they are eligible for PBP. They also can cash out their vacation with this contract. You get the 6th week, so that's 42 more TFP, I believe. That also you can cash out at your full rate, which would be $74 at the top of scale. So it just depends on what your sick leave looks like. If you are eligible for the 6th week of vacation, how much you've worked this past year for PBP. In transparency, I think that there are going to be a lot of senior folks who are going to be very, very happy with leaving under these circumstances. And we definitely are very cognizant. I will say that at least for two, but all of us, it was really, really, really important that senior folks were thanked for all of their sacrifices, everything they've done for the past few cycles of contract negotiations, specifically Section 6 negotiations, where they've voted in favor of junior folks and knowing that there wasn't a lot of gain for themselves. And I think that this is a really admirable way to nod at all of the ways that they have voted leading up to this. So that is the sort of package that you can create yourself heading out. So hopefully that kind of answers the question.
I just want to clarify, I think you said 74 TFP, but everyone who's at this level, you know what we're talking about. It's actually 28 TFP extra for the extra week of vacation, but it's $74 per TFP. So it's over $2,000 extra.
Yeah, also, Justin made a good point to us that Alaska has committed to discussing IVF benefits in the Benefits Coalition meetings that happen. So we will definitely push that.
Yeah. And the Benefits Coalition was referenced in the contract. We said that we would participate in that effort. So yeah.
Okay, next question. If the TA is approved and we get the state sick bank in place, will 2024 have any of the 10-day verification periods, or will those start in 2025?
Yeah, all of it would start in 2025. So nothing would change for this year. It would be the same for the rest of 2024.
Okay. In the event the merger is approved, what's the timeline for the start of JCBA negotiations? Would it be shorter than continued negotiations for ATA 2?
So the timeline for commencing JCBA negotiations would, if this TA is ratified, would probably be sometime in the fall. I mean, it would take quite a while, actually probably further down than that. Because yeah, the MEC would have to merge. Then they would have to select a negotiating committee. The committee would have to be trained. We'd have to put out a survey. Oh yeah, it would take longer.
So
Probably 2025.
yeah, just to like walk through the absolute fastest that it could happen, assuming that justice doesn't they don't do anything, or they say that the merger is approved. Either way, it makes the merger approved on August the 5th. The actual transaction would happen very shortly thereafter. Let's just say it's August sometime. We would merge the MECs together and have MEC elections within 90 days. So September, October, November for merged MEC. We would then have to post for the negotiating committee for the JNC to give people time to bid and such. That probably wouldn't happen interviews until say January, probably. And then send the training survey, definitely no earlier than even maybe like mid-spring would be the fastest turnaround for JCBA or for JNC.
Okay, I have a follow-up question that was related to the earlier question about the death in the family and bereavement leave versus state sick bank. So the specific question is, during the verification period, if there is a death in the family and the flight attendant does choose to use the state sick bank to supplement whatever bereavement they're using, would the company expect to receive a copy of the death certificate as verification? Or could the company ask for that if it was during a verification period?
So this is someone who is using bereavement leave and then wants to extend it using the state sick leave bank?
I believe that's the question.
Yeah, okay. So I don't know whether the company would ask for verification for bereavement leave, which I guess there's an indication they do not do that. So I don't know why they would require and I mean it could be a obituary notice or anything. I mean, honestly, I do not know what type of verification they would require.
Yeah, I can jump in this too. Like, so there's different parts of bereavement leave. There's the bereavement leave, then you can ask for extended bereavement leave. So there's some additional time frame that can be paid from your sick leave verification. Those would not be subject to verification other than what they could do now. Technically, there's nothing that stops management from asking for verification of bereavement. I know as a practice, they do not do that, and I do not anticipate them changing the practice there. In terms of calling out sick, I think the specific question is if you're calling out bereavement using your state sick bank during a verification period and the absence is over 3 consecutive work days, could they ask for the verification? And the answer is yes, potentially could. We have not asked that specific question, and we'll have to add that to the list of items to be clarified. I just can't make that commitment that no, they won't. I can't imagine them doing that, but we can certainly ask, and we would post that in the answers to the Q&A.
Okay, next question. What is the total cost of this TA to the company or to management?
Were we allowed to say
Uh,
the actual numbers?
yeah,
Because
we'll have
I
to
don't
say
think
it.
so. We could say the
Yeah.
percentage. It was 46%, more than it was a 46% increase all in to current payroll.
It is roughly $525 million. That's for the total cost of the deal.
Okay, and we got confirmation from management we could post that. Great. Okay, we don't have to strip this out of like that. This is
Ryan.
part of the. Okay.
Email from Ryan.
Okay. So basically, what was it? Half a billion?
Oh, a little bit more north of that, 525 million.
Okay. So I think that this came up from APFA posting about American putting in how much money into their deal. Just keep in
Put
mind
$1
that
billion
American is a much larger carrier, so that's why we're talking about smaller numbers.
Yeah.
All right, and kind of a follow-up to that, are you able to provide any information about what the recent percentages have been for TAs in other work groups in the company, as far as what
In the
they've gotten?
company?
Yeah.
This is where I'm not so sure if we can actually say that. So I will just, how about this? I will say that we are aware of other numbers through our negotiations with the company. We are generally under non-disclosure agreements unless we get approval from management to indicate that information. I think that the ALPA agreement was posted publicly, but until we can verify that, I can only say that it was significantly more percentage-wise than ALPA's agreement. Of course, dollar-wise, can't really do apples to apples because ALPA's payroll, their pay rates are so much higher. But in terms of percentage, ours was definitely higher, and the company believes that ours is a much higher deal than they have done in the past several decades, if not ever. Sorry to walk around that, but we just want to make sure we're not running afoul of our NDA
Yeah, we've
obligation.
all signed NDA, so we can't disclose too much.
Okay, next question. Do we still get record improvement if we don't call in sick during the quarter?
Yes. You still get the record improvement, you still get the end of year record improvement, all of those CBA provisions have been maintained.
Okay, and is there any provision in the TA for a clearer definition or requirement for what qualifies as a regular ops?
I'll take this one. So, the company is philosophically just super averse to any sort of interference with their level of productivity. There's this thing called NAQ, which is basically where all the airlines come together and talk about how productive a company they run. They like to maintain their standards and the perception there. So they were absolutely philosophically unwilling to change any version of reassignment. However, we noted that it was definitely top 5 when we got back the survey of issues that flight attendants needed to address. And so kind of like how we did with JA, where we tightened the language so much that there virtually isn't JA in except for really niche situations. We've kind of done that with reassignment, we believe. We've made reassignment so expensive, as you can see through our examples, because you get the greater of what you were scheduled or what you actually fly. Whichever one is bigger, you get paid that number at time and a half. Our hope is that reassignment becomes so expensive that they just stop doing it altogether. And I think that I've also heard that people are like, well, they're just going to stop doing reassignment if it's too expensive. And to that, the committee would like to say that is the point. That is the hope. That is the goal, that this provision becomes so expensive that flight attendants get back schedule integrity, that when they pick up a trip, they know that's the trip that they're going to work. And if for any reason they're not, they're going to get paid time and a half for the whole thing. So that is kind of where we stand with reassignment pay and irregular ops and all of those definitions. They're kind of a moot point. We're just going to get paid a lot of money if we're inconvenienced, and hopefully the company stops doing it altogether.
Okay. Next question. Was there any discussion around upgrading or getting a better system for crew access?
Yes, we did at least discuss it. But here's the reality of any scheduling system is that it is a very, very niche market with a very small number of suppliers. And so the ability to swap from one system to another is it's not like you can just go shopping and make a switch, because these are systems are so integrated with all the other various systems. It's not just about the crew trading system, it's about crew tracking, potentially payroll and how those interact, timekeeping. And there's just a lot of pieces to this. And so it's just there would be no effective way for us through flight attendant contract negotiations to mandate a change to the scheduling system that would potentially impact other groups or other tracking systems. But yes, we did talk about it a lot.
And I also think it's worthwhile to mention too that again, at the beginning, it was something that we definitely discussed and basically said, well, how much is it going to cost? What does that look like? And then after the merger announcement, again, we were placed in a situation where, correct me if I'm wrong, Paula, but I believe Hawaiian uses and operates on Flicka. And so there will be an opportunity to discuss which programming we take. There's no guarantee on which route the company ends up choosing, but they have both systems at the time of the merger. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. And as much they were not willing to spend money on something that they couldn't guarantee would then again change during the JCBA. So.
And Brian, before we go on, I could go back a little bit to the costing question, because I just pulled up quickly the Alaska Airlines press release and ALPA Alaska press release for their deal. And I can maybe talk around this, as it talks about that the wages increased up to, so the maximum increase was 23%. That's just the wages. So that would be their maximum increase. Our average increase was 24.3%. So our average was already above their maximum. And then we had many more other pieces in our agreement that weren't just the pay rates. That's why you see why there's a difference between 24.3% average increase compared to 46% all in. So just to give you some perspective, it's clearly a higher agreement. We just can't say without violating our NDA requirements exactly how much more that would be.
Right. And ours was 32% increase in wages only over the life of the deal.
Okay, next question. Can you clarify that if you are deplaning and crew scheduling calls you, that you do not have to answer your phone until the last passenger is off of the aircraft and you will not receive discipline? Is that correct?
It's actually a little bit more complicated than that, because so if it depends on if you're going transitioning into ground time or not. It's all depends on like when are they calling? Are they calling when you're deplaning on the last flight of your sequence or not? If it's the last flight of your sequence, they had to have already messaged you on block to block prior to block in. And if you didn't get that message in block to block, it doesn't matter if they call you. You are definitely not required to return the call and you're good to go. If you happen to be on, say, like you're transitioning into ground time where you're going to be on a sit and you happen to still be on the plane because because deplaning has taken a while and they call you, they should also be messaging you in block to block. Those both should happen, because that's the two things that should be happening at the same time. And then yes, you are required to call them back, but only after the completion of deplaning.
Okay. Next question. How many things within the agreement are still, quote, left to management discretion, unquote, as far as things like irregular operations, etc.? And how many of these loopholes still exist for the company to utilize?
Well, it feels like it's a bit of a loaded question to set up, but I'll answer it in the spirit in which it's asked. So, first of all, I know there's a lot of concern on the line about using the words management discretion. It's very similar to that management gets to decide. And we understand that if there's specific provisions where you don't want management deciding that, okay, we can argue whether that should be appropriate or not, but it's a common phrase to use for when management makes the determination of whatever that provision is, which is why the language is in there. We could use different language. We could say it is up to management, management decides, we happen to settle on management discretion, but let's see here. In general, management discretion, they can still reassign you basically at management discretion with some fences around it. However, you get paid a lot now. So that is the cap on that, or the trade-off is that although the definition of irregular operations isn't changing, that it's now so expensive, we believe that this will definitely drive behavior from the company to change the way that they schedule their airline. That's the short version. And then without looking through the actual, what are all the instances of management discretion without looking it up, it's hard for me to make that, to comment on that in detail right now. And team, please chime in if you can think of others.
PPP is a management discretion, but I don't know the exact number. I'm sure I can do a quick search to see how many times it populates in the contract.
Yeah, the verification periods for sick leave.
I'm just going off of like what's posted, so I didn't look at the full, like this is just the online TA minus sections 8, 5, 9, 10, 11. There's 19 instances of it. About leaves of absence, educational leave, that's been there forever. Leaves related to serious aircraft incidents, about whether they can drop you for additional items other than the contractual ones. That's discretion, been in there for a while. Same again. So there's a few instances of that. Bereavement can be extended at management discretion. It's actually been practiced for a long time. As Kiki mentioned, PPP. Voluntary foreign language training. Actually, we struck all that, so never mind. Oh yeah, that instead of disciplining flight attendants, if they get into a dispute, they can refer them to EAP. That's been management discretion. This is hotel transportation training for domicile. Okay, no, that's not really what we're talking about. Management drops always been management discretion. Special circumstances, whether to not reduce your points under section 32 is management discretion. And nope, that's not there. We took that out. That is it. Oh, the fatigue review board has discretion, but that's not management discretion. And that's it. Covered the items.
And next question, could you please elaborate on how the new PPP program will work if the TA passes?
Paul has been handling that one.
Okay. Okay. So the the annual payout is $4,000. Has to equal that. There are 3 periods of 4 months each. Management can pick which months those are, and it has to be announced the year prior to vacation bidding. Oh, awesome. Thank you, Justin. And the flight attendant must exceed 40 TFP over the 4-month block to achieve the PPP for that period. And it's important to remember that boarding pay counts towards that 40 TFP because boarding pay is not part of your bid award. It's paid above it. And the state sick bank leave counts towards the 40 TFP requirement also. And then 40 TFP must come from other sources other than union business and CB.
And then I'd like to add that I think that in our last session, there was concern about what if management does January, February, and then November, December, that they would be waiting all year for their bonus. And we just pointed out that under the current program, we have our 8-month block, and it's pretty similar. You have to work all of those months through November, and you don't see the payout until December. So it's not very dissimilar in the context of currently flight attendants still have to wait. And I think some flight attendants too also struggle over that 8-month period, actually being able to attain the biggest, and that is the biggest one, the biggest payout, because it's just such a long period of time to have to negotiate how and when you're going to work over the 5 TFP per month average.
Okay, next question. When calling out FMLA, which sick bank would be best to use?
If you're calling out FMLA, you're already protected and can't accrue any attendance points. So I would think that you would want to use the CBA bank. It would depend on, how much you had in each bank. But yeah, calling out FMLA, you're automatically protected from attendance points. So you don't have to worry about point reductions or bank points or anything.
Yeah, I agree. It's by default, if you don't make it an election, it goes to the CBA bank. So FMLA by default, if you did nothing, would go to CBA. And I can only think of one time when you'd want to select the state bank, which is if you didn't have enough in your CBA bank to cover the FMLA if it was specific to sick family, sick child, so that you didn't get points. But otherwise, strategically, you would, I think, want to use your CBA bank all the time for that.
Yeah, definitely. And plus, I don't think you can be required if you already have FMLA in place to submit verification. So we would have to look at how that combined, because if it was a verification period under the state sick bank.
Yeah, that's an implementation thing. It gets coded differently, so it's actually not coded as direct sick leave. It would be an FMLA code.
Yeah, but I don't even know if it's legal, if they can require that. I think they can't. So yeah, it wouldn't matter if it was a verification period or not, if you were calling out FMLA.
Time that they could ask for verification would be that if you're under suspicion of sick leave abuse, and that's a very specific instance.
Okay. Was it discussed about possibly paying 5 TFP per vacation day instead of 4 TFP?
Yes, it was. We talked a lot about this. We definitely wanted 5 TFP, well, at a minimum. And so if you look at actually on the TA page, you look at the industry comparisons, look under vacation. For carriers that have PBS, which we do, that the 4 TFP per day, or the equivalent of block hours, is actually the highest comparative when you're looking at our accrual and the amount of days. So if we have the 6th week, we have the highest payout or the highest amount of vacation of any carrier. And I know that doesn't feel like that when 4 TFP seems so much smaller than what we should be due because it's less than our 5 TFP ADPG. But the 4 TFP is based on a full week bid period, not on a day-by-day application. So when you're doing 7 TFP times 4, it's 28 TFP in the week over 5 days. Unless you're waiving your 48 and 7, you actually can't get anything higher than that. And just quick math, 28 divided by 5, that's actually 5.6 TFP per day. Granted, it could, we'd like to have that a little bit higher if we could, but again, amongst the PBS carriers, that is the highest in combination with our actual payout at 6 weeks. So
yeah,
we tried and tried
yes.
And ended up not achieving that by the end.
I think this is our last question for the day, but we will be compiling a question and answer sheet that'll be available on the TA site that people can review at their leisure. So if your question didn't get answered, it will get answered on the Q&A sheet.
Oh, is that you want to take one more question, Keegan?
Yeah, I think that was, yeah.
Okay.
I was unclear too. Are we finished, or is that actually just one more? One
One more
more.
question.
One more question.
Lucky person.
Okay. One question. So the question is, can you clarify that this contract is $525 million total cost for the 3 years, or is it for the first year, or is it $525 million increase over the total labor cost?
For the total term of the contract.
So over the life of the agreement, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you not hear me? Over the entire term of the contract. Yeah.
Just making sure. Okay, well, we went an hour past the time that we had allotted, so thank you for sticking with us for basically almost 2 hours of Q&A. We sincerely appreciate it. Our in-person roadshows start next week. If you're interested in attending, please sign up for one. You can find all of that information along with all of the other resources on the contract2022.afaalaska.org/TA page. Voting will open next week. It closes on August the 14th. Please do not wait until the last minute. It's okay if you're waiting until August the 5th for DOJ, but don't wait until August the 14th. And it is very important that everyone votes. Thank you very much for being with us today. We appreciate it, and we will see you either at the road shows or out there on the line. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks. Thank you.